I'm Carol Gilks, the Customer Operations Director here at Service Express Europe, and I'm sure many of you will have spotted that I'm not Mike Hallam. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, so I've stepped in to host the webcast and will do my best to fill his shoes. I'm delighted today to be joined by our special guest panelists. We've got Matt Day and David Hummer. Matt is the IT Director and member of the Forterra executive team. Forterra is actually a leading manufacturer of clay and concrete building products, and Matt has an extensive experience as a senior IT director, overseeing major transformations and change programs in sectors including manufacturing, construction, and retail. David is the managing partner for growth and business development at Kyndryl UK and I. Before joining Kyndryl, he's held several similar roles in Capita, AT&T and IBM. David has a vast range of skills and experience, from leading teams to generate sustainable growth, driving projects that not only increase efficiency, but also generate significant revenues, also while maintaining high levels of client satisfaction. So I am delighted that they could join our webinar today to give their insights. So thank you both for participating in today's conversation. So as we look back across 2022, it was a year of mixed outcomes. Post-pandemic recovery drove growth in the first half of the year, while the second half we saw the global economy take some dramatic change. A recession is a peculiar thing. No one can ever accurately predict when one will arrive, how big it will be, or how long it will last. And this means a much greater level of uncertainty for 2023. Leaders will be tested on how they respond, adapt, and continue to ensure growth and resilience. So Matt, if I start with you, what are the implications for organizations when a recession hits?
Okay, so I guess there are manifold implications. I guess naturally people do tend to focus on cost optimization. That tends to come to the fore. So that's something we need to think about. You need to put even greater emphasis on customer service. So you really want to maintain those revenue streams. Lots of additional pressure on new or expansive initiatives come around. And there can be challenges in either hiring or retaining talent, obviously. So those are the key headline items, which I'm sure we'll dip into a little bit more.
And David, would you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Matt is spot on. I think the one thing that I would add to it, you mentioned before that you can't predict a recession. Well, we know another one will come, and we know there's been another one, and we know that there will be many, many challenges, whether it's recession, pandemic, war, you name it, it's going to happen. So, although today we're using recession as a focal point, a recession is just another change that a company has to cope with, irrespective of whether it's what it's caused by. And to Matt's point, if you think about it, what are you going to do with your employees? What are you going to do with your customers? What are you going to do with your products? What are you going to do with your suppliers? These are all themes that we'll explore as we continue this afternoon.
Brilliant. And so I think that kind of leads me into wondering, what can business leaders then do from your experience to prepare for that change, and in this instance, the recession?
Yeah, so I guess, sorry, David, I guess picking up on that point, I mentioned that cost optimization comes to the fore. Maybe a little bit of a cliche, but I tend to focus or try to focus on value rather than cost. So if you've got a good, clear visibility of the value that your services bring, that can really help sharpen the mind. In terms of customer service, we should never be complacent, but obviously it has a greater currency in those environments. So actually, if we are looking at new initiatives, then actually, and it's a little bit of a cliche again, business case, business case, business case. If we can be really focused on what we're trying to achieve, then actually that stands us really good stead as we're going into a recession. It's really easy to progress initiatives when times are good, but actually it shouldn't really be any different if you're focused on the outcomes you desire, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose in addition to that, a leader is only as good as his or her team and the people within the company, okay? And during any change, it's a leader's responsibility to lead It's a leader's responsibility to communicate. And in a time of a recession, the level of communication, the clarity of communication, the consistency of communication is absolutely vital. All right, people in the company know a recession is coming. They know change is coming. So if you're not clear with them, if you're not open and honest with them in terms of the challenges that you face, it means each individual in the company will make his or her mind up in terms of what they're doing. And to Matt's point, value. Now, yes, we can run off and we can take 25% of the cost out. You cannot cut your way to success. So you have to be quite specific in terms of what are you going to stop doing? What are you going to change? The only barometer for that is, does this product, process, person add value to the end outcome? That's all that counts. Now, if as a leader, you've got absolute clarity in terms of where the value points are, and I'll stress again, not just a value in your product, but value in your people, value in your process and your supply chain. If you know that value, you know where a cut, if you have to make one, has least impact. And more importantly, where do you focus when it comes to that all-important value point that Matt's making?
And just backing what David's saying there, and he started with communication. I mean, for me, that's very much the case with your employees, but also any of your trading partners as far as you can. Good, clear, honest, open communication, as frequent as possible, so that there's a shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve and why. So if the value isn't present, a shared understanding of that, or where the value is present, just as important, a shared understanding of that. So those common goals and the understanding of them, absolutely key. And agility and adaptability, because inevitably things will change. The level of investment may change, and just good understanding of that, fundamental.
So thinking about that communication kind of both ways then with your employees and with your suppliers is a really, really core skill that a successful business leader will need kind of coming up in the next few months.
And I think a broad view as well, Carol. So I can't think of a situation where that communication doesn't need to go down the supply chain route. So if you're creating a left-handed cricket bat, right, you want to be the best left-handed cricket bat you can make, but your communication needs to go down the supply chain to who's providing you the component parts for you to make your left-handed cricket bat, and that's very important. And also then, how does the communication flow down to your customer set? And as we touched on a little while ago, the chances are there's a third party involved, an alliance partner, some sort of channel partner. So again, that communication has to be all encompassing. It isn't just communication within your company and your team. It's suppliers, it's partners, it's customers. Many industries have regulatory pressures. So a good leader thinks of all of those stakeholders that are involved in that value discussion.
Okay. And then one of the other kind of key objectives of businesses right now is kind of net zero. So adding that layer on top of trying to kind of simultaneously build and reinforce resilience, how can we as executives kind of work towards another change that is completely driving towards net zero?
Yeah, and I guess there's probably a number of levers to pull there. I can go for what for me is an obvious one, but may not be for everybody. In the nature of my organisation, we are quite relatively heavy energy consumers. And so for us, there's real financial pressures to be as sustainable as possible, to utilise less energy. We trade in carbon credits, carbon emissions as part of our manufacturing process. We do unfortunately emit carbon into the atmosphere. So for us, there's actually a very real financial incentive to maintain our net zero goals and our sustainability goals. So actually, there's a financial lever to pull. I guess there are other levers too. On a human level, I think we're all aware of the pressures on the planet. And so actually our own personal values lean into that as well. And if that's true for us on this call, that will be true for our employees. But also harking back to the other point, are various other stakeholders. So our customers will be sensitive and focused in this space as well. So actually, we can't afford to ignore this. So I think for me, actually, the recession probably doesn't change in that respect.
I think you're right. It doesn't change, and I suppose net zero is another one of these things that executives and leaders have to cope with. And no, to emphasize Matt's point, when we're replying to RFPs or tenders, or when we're having value discussions with our clients, 9 times out of 10, net zero will be on the agenda. It's vital. It's important, and so all of our interactions with our customers, all of our public sector business, there are very specific sections within our responses that have to cover things like net zero. The pressures, the regulatory pressures that's put on a company means that you have to go, again, further down your supply chain to ensure that people in your supply chain understand this position on net zero. And again, to emphasize another one of Matt's points, when we go into the market to recruit talent and build skills, it is becoming more and more important for the younger people. They want to join a company that has a position on net zero. They want to join a company that has an ESG policy. They want to join a company that has a diversity policy, and not only writes it down in the annual report, but actually lives and breathes that change. So for all leaders, if things like net zero or diversity or inclusion aren't part of your culture, the chances are you're not going to be able to recruit the best talent. Because these people care.
Yeah, is that something, Matt, you've seen from Forterra about kind of how important that sustainability, that ESG agenda is for you to recruit talent?
Yeah, I think that is the case. I think it certainly is important, increasingly so for the younger generation. I think they think about it in an entirely different way. So yeah, I think it's something that our potential employees definitely look for. They want to understand our messaging on this and actually what we're doing in this space. And one other stakeholder that I forgot to mention didn't mention earlier, and we think about our customers, we think about our suppliers, we think about our employees. As a publicly limited organisation, actually our investors are keenly interested, and we will either lose investors or fail to attract investors, depending on what we're doing in this space. So again, there are all sorts of reasons, but ultimately there will be a financial implication in failing to deliver on our objectives as well, which again actually helps to sharpen our minds perhaps, because that's a very objective target. Some of the other things are a little bit more subjective.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the things kind of when you ask yourself, does this kind of net zero initiative add value? It ticks all of those boxes across every single area. So it's something you absolutely have to keep a keen eye on, regardless of everything else and all of the other changes that are going on.
Yeah.
And that's the point about that value chain, for the want of a better phrase. Okay, if you don't understand the value points in your go-to-market and your entire product cycle, how do you know the impact of not having a net zero policy? Okay, so having to sit down and work out, okay, we are not going to meet the government's requirements on X, Y, and Z. So what? Well, sorry, you can't say so what. What is that going to cost us? Well, that means we won't be able to bid for the following contracts. Oh, okay. All right, Kyndryl, we're an independent company. We floated on the New York Stock Exchange. So to Matt's point, people who invest in the company want to understand and see what's happening with our zero policy. So it comes back to, do you understand that value cycle? And so whether it's a net zero discussion, whether it's a recession discussion, whether it's a war in Ukraine, which results in people being displaced or manufacturing plants have to be closed down, as a leader, you have to be very adept, and Matt used the word agile. You have to be very agile in terms of being able to respond to any of these things. And to do that, you have to understand the impact of any of these changes. That means you've got to have a fundamental understanding of how your company works, how it generates value, and how the people in that company help you generate that value.
So that's definitely kind of going back to the previous question about what do leaders need to do to prepare. 101 is making sure you understand that value chain, because then you can answer any of those questions about what's important if you're not able to kind of process map the impacts of those things.
Yeah, and I think it's just having good grip, good visibility of where your value is, where you have discretionary spend, then that's very keen to focus on. But going back to those initiatives, agility comes to the fore in these times. The environment can change very quickly for us, so we need to be able to adapt and move very fast. But I guess as leaders as well, we do have to balance our short-term tactical steps with our long-term strategic aims, and we do have to look a little bit deeper sort of into the recession and beyond and try and balance those. So that can always be the challenge. So actually focusing on the value add just is fundamental, because it helps us navigate both of those paths.
I love this. It would spark all sorts of other things here, Matt, as we did the last time we spoke. And there are things that you just have to do in business, okay? Right? You can't live on promises. There are aspects of recession you have to cope with. Discretionary spend, as Matt says, is a great example, okay? I don't know many companies today that don't have some sort of limitation on travel, right? Whereas 5 years ago, everybody would travel everywhere. It was never an issue. The pandemic brought about a fundamental change in business processes. Okay, it accelerated a lot of digital transformation activity. So you've got to do the basics well. You've got to make sure you're containing cost. But when it comes to a dramatic change, you've got to know where to cut a cost that has the least impact. Sometimes something that you think is obvious to cut a cost, marketing, right? Everybody seems to go, oh, all right, recession, right? Stop marketing. My marketing MD made me say this. Believe it or not, in the time of a recession, probably the last thing you want to do is disappear from your customer's consciousness. You don't want to do that, because you are going to come out of it, and you want to come out of it stronger and better. So although it may feel sensible to cut marketing, for example, it's probably not a good thing to do. And I'm sure Matt's got other examples of things that you could cut that could hurt.
Yeah, and look, this is a key focus area, I think. So when we think about, again, looking at costs comes to the fore in these times, just having that slightly different view to seek opportunities. So if you have additional resources available because you are quite simply less busy, then actually how could they be deployed to add additional value? So that's a key focus, I think. And that's something we'd certainly look at. I guess the other thing, listening to David, that strikes me is that we've just had a fantastic rehearsal in the last couple of years when we looked at our activities through the pandemic. We talked about the need for good, open, clear, honest communications, but the frequency of those communications, I have a suspicion that most people that listen to this will have upped their communication game in the early stages of the pandemic. They would have talked to their teammates much more frequently on a wider range of topics. So actually, we've got some quite good rehearsal skills in recent memory. It also made us focus on what's really important. Some of us were limited in where we could focus and perhaps the activities of our businesses. So we, again, have in very recent muscle memory, a key focus on what's really important to drive the business forward.
I think just coming back to the net zero question for a minute, Carol, not so much here in Kyndryl, but for many of our end clients, the regulatory changes and the environmental changes they require is starting to have more and more influence on their products and services. Okay, that's what I mean by that. Well, if you'll spend your entire life building V12 petrol guzzling cars, you're probably sitting there thinking, I probably need to think about diversifying my product portfolio. So from our viewpoint, more and more, we're having more and more conversations, more and more of those value conversations with our clients in respect to what they're trying to provide for their clients, and more net zero is coming on the agenda. So not just through the procurement process, but we're now delving into what types of technology do they need to handle future product development. And that takes us into areas such as artificial intelligence. It takes us into areas such as deep data analytics. So our client base are putting more complex demands on us. And one of those drivers is net zero. The other driver is agility, the other driver is economy. But there isn't a single client meeting that I haven't attended since I joined Kyndryl a year ago where there isn't a conversation on net zero across one area of that spectrum. And in many cases, all the points that we've discussed for net zero.
And then probably linking that to what Matt was saying is, if you've got capacity in your teams because they're not doing loads of customer deployments or something, you could then get them to start thinking about how do we diversify our product set to take into account big data or AI or something like that. So you're kind of actually killing two birds with one stone, and you've decided not to cut those people, but actually to reinvest them in propelling the business forward for the future.
Yeah, I give you a practical example of that one. I suppose from our viewpoint, we were created as an outsourcer, and as a result, we go in and we'd say, oh, I can run your IT X% cheaper than anybody else. Those days are long, long gone. What we tend to do now is we're having conversations, yes, around efficiencies. So yes, we've got tools and technologies that enable you to do more with less. But for our own team, and more importantly, the client's team, freeing up that resource, to Matt's point, gone are the days when you'd free up the resource and you'd want them out of the company. These people have invested time in the company. These people have a skill and a knowledge that you're going to need to tap, and you're going to need to work with them, because these are the people that helped you create the company. These are the people who understand your customers. These are the people who understand your products. So you want to create an environment where even if you do free up a particular group of people, skills or talents, that you've got to take Matt's point, you've got the agility, the flexibility to be able to say, right, the next thing that's going to come and hit us is X, Y, Z. We know it's going to take 3 months to do that. Now it's the time to start a process of reskilling, of reevaluating. So you can imagine we're shifting thousands of people from traditional mainframe skills, and our friends at AWS and Google and Microsoft are more than happy to fund their education and their reskilling, because we then got people who understand mainframes. We then have people who understand the hyperscaler environment, and who better positioned than that individual to understand what needs to happen when you go from a mainframe to a hyperscaler environment. Now, that's just a Kyndryl example. There are many, many other examples where you don't want to lose those people. So you don't want to just cut costs.
Yeah, and look, on that point, I guess there's a couple of things. First of all, by its very nature, recessions are cyclical. There will be an end. It's a temporary state. And actually, if you're going to make a change, if you're going to lose people, at some point, there's a very real possibility that you need to find those people again, or those people with those skills. And actually, finding and retaining talent is probably more difficult than it's ever been. The world has opened up. There's, gone are the days where you might need to select a small geographical pool for your resource. Work from anywhere. Most people on this call are probably not sat in their main corporate head office or place of work. So actually, you don't want to be too short-sighted. So the key is really to have good adaptable skills embedded within your colleagues, so that actually you can deploy them where you can get most value, even if that's a change.
And are there any other skills you think the organisation needs to either have or bolster to survive, in challenging times?
For me, I'm not sure it's different skills. I think it's just different emphasis, really, and different focus. I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record. Adaptability, agility, they're absolutely key. Sometimes it's really having better visibility of what's important. We take a lot for granted. So it does come back to understanding the value of your operations. What are the things that we do which are absolutely mandatory? What's the value? Where's the value at the end of that? What are value add but might be optional and just having that clear understanding up front helps you make difficult decisions far sooner. In fact, they don't become difficult decisions quite often.
And Matt, have you got any examples of how you've gone about, because I think this kind of comes back to that whole value piece, how you went about mapping that value piece for Fruterra that you could share with us?
Oh, that's a great question. It's not always easy, is the honest answer. So I think just that core understanding. We try to focus on process, really, and get a full process understanding, where we can understand, because often the investment of effort isn't where you get the benefit. So that's really important to us. And it's just at times like these where it matters that much more. So we often, as we head towards tougher times, a little bit of rear guard action, just brushing up a little bit where we should be strong anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just good communications, good understanding, good visibility and traceability. And again, it's not just with employees, it's with our trading partners as well.
And I think that kind of links to what David was saying about that, cutting of that marketing spend then absolutely inhibits your ability to have that communication with your customers and keep yourself front of mind, because, you've suddenly disappeared. So I will also send you the £10 from our marketing director, David, who is also very keen to keep the marketing budget high.
Unfortunately, I cannot take bribe. I cannot take bribing, but I do like a good bottle of cloudy base Sauvignon Blanc. Matt raises some great points. Okay, and I'll add another term for you, which is integration. Okay. Everybody in a company does their bit, and companies, as we all know, are organized by division and everything else. What we're bloody awful at, and I'll get fired for saying this because we're not much better at it, is that we tend to operate and work in silos by organization. What we found here at Kyndryl, both for ourselves and our clients, is that's the worst way ever to define value, because what the client values is the end-to-end flow. So one thing you have to focus on is how do you integrate the company in that value. So that means you have to, your comms team have to be on the ball in terms of communicating what's happening. And we spend a lot of time talking about the why. In times of recession, in times of turmoil and transformation, people hate getting an email saying, I need this report by 4 o'clock. Right now, if you put some context on it and say, we're in the process of making X, Y, and Z decision, please, could you do your best? I could do with having this information because I'm going to take this information that's going to help us do X, Y, and Z. Then human nature says the person now has some context to what you're asking them to do. You may be asking them the wrong question, and they may come back and say, well, actually, David, I don't think you want me to do that. I think you want me to do this. Mm-hmm. So that integration and that clarity of communication across all the stakeholders has to be heightened when you're making these types of decisions.
And then building on that, how can we as leaders help our people to feel safe and kind of channel all of their energy productively?
I'm the executive sponsor for well-being here at Kyndryl. We have Kyndryl Inclusion Networks, and I'm very passionate about well-being. So it's a good question. Good question. No, I come back to what we said before. We're all different. We're all, well-being and stress is very personal to each and every one of us. Okay, so as executives, as leaders, the best we can do is create an environment where people can express themselves, where people can express concern that they're overworked. They can express concern if they see something that isn't working. So I think from our viewpoint as leaders, creating that environment where people can be themselves, where people can be open, where people feel they can contribute is absolutely vital. In return, we have to be responsive. If somebody comes up and says, I'm not feeling comfortable, David, because of A, B, and C, it's one thing to sit there and go, I hear you, which is, by the way, one better than Yeah, and well, why are you telling me? I'm only a manager. So saying I hear you is better than ignoring it. But what's important for the employee and ultimately the company and customers is what you do with that request. Okay, now every company has got employee helplines. Every company has got a whole bunch of things that we have to do under health and safety rules, etc. But is it ingrained in your culture? Do people know what to do? Do people recognize when a colleague or a manager or a peer is under a little bit of pressure? And what do you do about it is important. And that brings us on to the point of skills. So in times of recession, if somebody's got some spare time, then don't have them sitting there. Skill them up. And we tend to say, go off and build some technical skills, or go and build some financial skills, or go and build. Well, no, the reason that we have Kyndryl Inclusion Networks, the reason that we have people like myself sponsoring well-being is we want people to educate themselves. We want managers to be educated in terms of helping people understand and create the right working environment. So skills isn't just technical skills and financial skills. It's, as I like to say, we are human beings, not human doings. And yet all of our education and training is all about us doing things rather than being.
Mm. Yeah, look, just echoing that and linking up some of the other topics. Typically, they can be uncertain times, and lots of people are uncomfortable with uncertainty. So actually just sharing good information in a timely fashion, a little bit of humble management as well. There's every chance that we don't have all of the answers. So actually, if you're sharing what the challenge is, then the person that may be feeling a little anxious in that space may well contribute to actually how we're going to overcome that challenge. Then they feel, firstly, fully informed, but B, part of a potential solution, and that way everybody benefits. So I think it does come down to very good, open, frequent communications, as much as you possibly can.
So don't wait until you have all of the answers, because actually that day will never come, because something will change tomorrow when you think you've got all of the answers and mean that you still don't. So yeah, no, that's
I think at the end of the day, Carol, at the end of the day, when I'm leading a team meeting, I always have a simple rule. Okay, you can ask me any question, okay, because you're going to get one of three answers. You're either going to get the answer, or I'm going to tell you I don't know the answer and I'll go and find out, or I'm going to tell you I know the answer, but for many reasons I can't tell you. Okay, and that's the way I'll open up a meeting with the team. Okay, and then and guess what? Yeah, everybody focuses on, I asked David, are we going to have a redundancy program? I've asked David, are we going to shut an office? I've asked David, are we going to shut a product line down? They're all experienced enough to know that I may know the answer to that, but with the best will in the world, I'm not able to say that. But the fact that they feel comfortable asking those questions is what's important.
Yeah,
because everybody's on their own individual journey. I don't know if I bump into somebody in the office, whether they've had a good day, whether they've had a bad day, whether they lost a family member, whether their football team lost. Everybody's in their own space. And so recognizing that. Now, as Matt says, fine tune it when everything's going fine. People can, they rock and roll with it. They'll go with it. They'll make decisions and they take things in their stride. If you don't create the environment that Matt's explaining in terms of being an open and honest, people will fill in the gaps. Mm-hmm. Oh, he didn't say that we were going to keep that office open, therefore that's going to close. If that office closes, that means my commute is going to go up and I can't afford to do that. And oh my God, I've just bought a new car, so therefore I don't have enough money to do the commute, and therefore I won't be able to do my job. And therefore, oh my God, and then my boyfriend's going to leave me because I haven't got a proper job. And
yeah,
people's heads explode, all because they misunderstood, or there wasn't clarity in that moment when you said to them, hey.
And I think then it's also about, when you realize that situation has happened, you've kind of got to own the message and course correct the next time. so that it doesn't happen to the next person, because you don't want them awake at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, spiraling out of suddenly I've lost my job and I'm homeless, and all because you've said something slightly awry to what they wanted to hear.
Yeah. It's the reality of leadership today, Carol, as Matt and I can testify to.
So thinking about kind of growing the business then, which is something that we all have targets to try and do. How can we use disruption to open doors with new customers? Do either of you have any experience in kind of enhancing the situation with new customers or winning new business that you could share with us?
Shall I go first, Matt? Change is good. There are two types of human on this planet. Change is a nightmare, it's horrible, or change is good. Okay. If you think of change as bad or recession as bad, you're not in a good place. If you see change as opportunity, it makes a difference. So for example, if a company is having to go through a process of having to reduce cost, and their current provider isn't able to provide that assistance with that cost, it's an opportunity both as a customer and a supplier to have a conversation that could displace a competitor. Okay, so but as Mike and I keep telling everybody, that's a cost discussion, not a value discussion. If as a provider to a client, you don't understand their value prop and how your capability maps onto that, but I do, guess what? I can knock on the door and say to Matt, I know you're currently using supplier X. We've done some analysis of your company. We believe we can add value not only in X, but also Y and Z. All right. So if the client is focusing and getting sharper in terms of what she's trying to achieve and what she's trying to do, as a supplier and a provider, if you're on that same wavelength, you've got an opportunity to grow your business, and you also have an opportunity to potentially displace a competitor.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I'm reaching for specific examples, but for me, it's continuation of what we talked about before. So communication, so it's voice of customer. If I understand exactly where the stresses and strains for our customers are, I can very quickly and easily have a good view as to where we can assist with them. And the reality is, if we can't assist them, then that's something we need to focus our efforts on very quickly. So I think it is just that good open communication and understanding the challenges that we face across the supply chain actually is just fundamental to success. And that's not exclusive to the prospect of recession, but it really does hone our minds, I think.
I love the statement, change is good. And I think it's really interesting because actually people have memories, don't they? And if you've survived the last change and actually you saw that as good, you can go positively into the next change. Whereas if you have a bad experience, then any change that comes along, you get a bit nervous about. And I guess it's our job as leaders to understand where people are on that journey and really help them and give them that sense of security and safety to understand that opportunities will come.
Yeah, look, I mean, as human beings, we learn more when we get something wrong than when we get it right. Because if we get something right, if we're good at playing rugby, or if we win a bid, we assume that we did everything right, and therefore we don't learn. After every rugby game, and I watch these days, I'm way beyond the playing age, more and more sports teams of every level learn more when they lose a game than when they win a game. That's why they go back over all the recordings. That's why they do that sort of thing. So change and getting something wrong is a learning experience, right? We didn't learn to walk by reading a book or watching a bloody YouTube video, right? My grandson isn't going to learn to walk by watching bloody TikTok, right? He's going to learn to walk by, I want to get over there. I'm fed up with this bum shuffling and crawling. I've seen people walk, I'm going to have a go at this. And you'll stand up and you'll fall over. and then he still wants to get this, we'll stand up and fall over again, and so on and so forth. So that's a key principle that we sometimes forget in business, that we all went through. Every single one of us on this planet went through that same little process.
Yeah, and I'm going to do something slightly counterintuitively for anyone who knows me, because my background is very much in change. I thrive in change personally. For some of our customers, actually stability, consistency of supply and predictability is really important. And again, that just comes back to understanding what's important. So for me, sometimes I might have to sit on my hands a little bit in terms of change, and actually restrict the flow of change in times of recession, because perhaps people don't want the prospect of risk or disruption that can come with change. So yeah, it's a good point of balance, I think, is key.
So just really conscious of time, I think we're due to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but we've had a question come in from the audience, which is, do you think companies' growth targets for 2023 are achievable given the economic downturn?
It's a great question, but I think it really depends on the company. So I can talk a little bit about challenges we face or our sensitivity to this. So we are a big supplier to the housing industry. And actually the housing industry can be a little bit of a weather vane for the economy. Because if you are uncertain about the economic outlook, then you might well not move house or extend your house or do those kind of things. So yeah, I think at best there's going to be a lot of unpredictability in the current year. So I think it will be different organisation by organisation. But as we've talked about, or hopefully the message we've tried to get across throughout, is that it can also bring opportunity. So for some companies, they will absolutely thrive. If you can't adjust and adapt, then you may have a more bumpy ride this year. It's difficult, I think.
That's a really good answer. That's really good answer.
It is, and I'm sure that somebody, one of my sales teams, must have paid the person to ask the question, because I get that question every time I do the forecast review. So look, all the things we talked about in terms of understanding the value, in terms of being agile, in terms of being flexible, in terms of understanding the skills. As leaders, we had to cope with the pandemic. We've had to cope with a recession. We've had to cope with our customers going into recession. And so we've got to be very, very careful and very selective. So it's fair to say we will not be signing as much managed services business this year as we did last year. That's just a fact, because people are not prepared to commit to sign £100 million 5-year deals. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean we still give our managed services team a massive target? No, it doesn't, because that we know that's not achievable. Wait a minute, we're a publicly quoted company. We have to meet our growth targets. So what that does mean is that our consult, integration and AI business are going to get bigger targets to compensate for that growth. And so, you know, you have to understand your business, you have to understand the value flow, and then you have to decide what you're going to grow, when are you going to grow it, and the incentive plan, you know, and I'll say this openly, having been in sales for a while, I've been in many companies where calling it an incentive plan is a nonsense. It's a disincentive plan. You just sit there and go, I'm never going to make that target. Okay. And then there've been other situations where it absolutely is an incentive plan. And whether that's incentive plans as salespeople, whether that's incentive plans from company bonuses, good leaders will know how to set the right type of growth targets across the organization. Not so good leaders take the easy path and just say, I'm giving everybody a 10% growth target. Well, in one stroke, you've demonstrated you don't understand the value in your company.
That is definitely an answer you've had to give previously, David, on the regular then, isn't it? We have another question, which is, what are some of the mistakes leaders could make or either of you have made and learned from? Oh, what a question. I don't have to answer these.
You don't have enough time for me to list all of the mistakes. Some of the things we've already talked about, not being well enough prepared in understanding the value in what we do. you learn from that, which can lead to a lack of agility. Perhaps the speed you make decisions can be a little bit slower, and so you regret not having that sort of information up front. I have previously downsized and regretted it later, lost some skills to some key people, which seemed like the right decision at the time, but with hindsight, probably could have waited a little longer. So yeah, a couple of things we've talked about. To David's point through the session we had, you tend to learn more by your mistakes. So yeah, I guess the points I've made, some of them come from mistakes. David, from your side?
I'm perfect. I'm Welsh, therefore by default I'm perfect. I've never made a mistake in my life. No, I'll just pick one because it's one that unfortunately you say you learn from mistakes every now and again. Sometimes I do the same thing, and that comes down to being afraid to say I don't know. And the danger is that you make something up because you feel as if you should know. I'm a leader, therefore I should know absolutely everything. If somebody asks me a question, I'm just going to say 42. Right? Every time I've ever done that, karma strikes. And at some point further down the line, somebody comes back and says, well, actually, David, you said it was 42. We now know it was 28. All right. So, human nature sometimes tends to take over. So I think leaders have got to be gut-wrenchingly honest, not just in what they portray and what they say to people, but also they've got to be gut-wrenchingly honest with themselves, because that's where it all starts. Integrity and honesty starts in here, not what you say. And if what you say and what you feel are not in sync, people will pick up on it in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really honest and moving point to finish on. So I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I've learned a lot, and I can reflect on lots of your experiences and think about, oh yeah, that happened to me during that time and I wish I'd done that differently. I've been making some notes. I've got some key takeaways that I just wanted to share. And I think the first one is kind of value over cost. And really then, what does value mean? So making sure that you understand that integrated value chain, because again, David, I've seen that happen so many times. I know my bit and my value in my silo, but I have no idea how that impacts upstream or downstream. So kind of value over cost, really then understanding that value, and then communication everywhere, thinking about that whole stakeholder map and kind of trying to help people, and then also being brutally honest and saying, I just don't know. And because actually we don't know all of the answers. We can use our skills and experience to try and predict, but actually if we get ready, we don't have to have all of the answers because we've got our teams around us, and as long as we're continuing to communicate with them, the power of the team is much greater than just the power of the individual. So that's what I'm taking away from today, and I just wanted to thank you both for all of your time that you've given us, all of your insights and all of your help and support, because I know I will be a better leader following this conversation. So if you want to ask any further questions, we've got an email address up on the webinar. Please feel free to send us any additional questions or any thoughts. And thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity, Carol. We appreciate it. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.